Hello, everybody. My name is James Curtis. And for those of you who use VASES to incorporate fees, this video may be helpful for you. I recently received an email asking about the fact that VASES uses or it has the potential to have higher than 100% residue ratings for certain anatomic structures. Those anatomic structures include the oral pharynx, hypopharynx, vocal folds, and subglottis. And it's true. Each of these typically range from 0 to 100% for residue ratings, but greater than 100% is possible. And so I wanted to quickly talk about some of those situations. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So here we're looking at the vocal folds. And when we do our residue ratings for the vocal folds, we need to think about our various kind of substructures. Specifically, we have the superior surface of the membranous portion of the vocal folds. And when we do our residue ratings for vocal folds, we think about the amount of residue that's covering the superior surface of the vocal folds, but taking into account the entire vocal fold boundary, which includes also the ventricles and the medial edges of the vocal folds, and also the space between the medial edges. So in this example, we don't see any sort of residue covering the vocal folds. Here, I kind of drew in some gray things. And if that was a vocal fold, then this would be covering around 17% of the vocal folds. Here, something similar. If all of this gray represents residue, then here about 62% of the vocal folds of the superior surface of the membranous vocal folds would be covered with vocal fold residue. But let's say we had residue on the membranous, the medial edge of the left vocal fold, as well as in some of the left ventricle. And in this example, around 111% of the vocal folds is covered with residue. That's because if we put all of the residue that's contained anywhere within the boundary of the vocal folds, this would be kind of overflowing. And so we want to think about of the boundary of the superior surface of the membranous vocal folds, how much of that would be covered. And so if it's greater than 100%, we kind of start from scratch again and think about how much of that surplus would be filling up the or covering the vocal fold boundary again. Here we're going to think about now the subglottic residue rating, because this is a very similar concept. So within the subglottis, we have our subglottic shelf, we have our cricoid cartilage, and we have our trachea. Subglottic residue ratings include anything below the glottis. So that includes anything within the subglottic shelf, cricoid cartilage, and trachea. But what we do for this residue rating is we put anything that we see, even if it is distally into the trachea, we put that into the subglottic shelf and think about how many of those subglottic shelves would be covered with subglottic residue. So in this example, it would be 0%. Here, if these gray little circles represented residue, then around 8% of the subglottic shelf would be covered with residue. Here we have stuff that's not contained within the subglottic shelf, and instead some of it's in the cricoid cartilage and some of it is now beginning to be in the trachea. And in this example, around 14% of the subglottic shelf would be covered. So if we move all those little dots into the subglottic shelf, around 14% of that would be covered. And here, if we kind of created more of a blanket effect, then in this example, around 112% of the subglottic shelf would be covered with subglottic residue. And certainly if we got glimpses of further down to the trachea, we would incorporate that into our residue rating as well. I'm going to just do one more landmark. I'm going to skip the hypopharynx, but instead I'm just going to do the oral pharynx. And for this one, I'm going to switch our view to a video fluoroscopic view just so we can kind of see that height in a little bit more detail. It's a little bit easier for me to outline for this. In this example, we have to think about what is our boundary for the oropharynx, and contained within the oropharynx would be the vallecula, and what's that boundary. So if we think about just the vallecula, this would extend from the base of tongue, lingual surface of the epiglottis to the rim of the epiglottis, which is where the laryngeal and lingual surfaces meet. So this is our boundary of the vallecula. In this example, there's no residue in there, so it'd be a rating of 0%. So 0% of the vallecula is filled with oropharyngeal residue. In this example, it's starting to kind of get filled up a little bit more, and around 50% of the vallecula is filled with oropharyngeal residue. In this example, we have some residue that's also contained on the base of tongue, a little bit on the pharyngeal wall. This is likely going to be occurring more with purees and foods and not so much with liquids. But if this did occur, we would imagine to kind of put that all inside the molecula, and this would be a rating of around 70%. If liquid or food or puree was filled up to at this level, it would be around 81% of the molecula is filled with oropharyngeal residue. Here, of course, around 100% of the molecula is filled with oropharyngeal residue. And anything above 100%, if it's liquid, is probably not going to exist. It may, but it'll likely kind of flow inferior to the pure forms in hypopharynx or into the laryngeal vestibule. But for purees and foods, it's possible that you can get above 100%. So imagine a little amount of residue on top of this. We think about then how much of that would be our surplus. And so in this example, we have around 131% of the molecula is filled with oropharyngeal residue. So I hope this helps kind of clear things up. I hope this helps with a little bit of calibration for you all, thinking about our anatomic boundaries, our substructures within each boundary, and then how we go about doing our ratings. Let me know if you have any questions.